So you learned as a gamer the power of collaboration and power of team learning and synchronous, problem solving. And so that led to you wanting to research that. So what did you actually like research when you got a
Mm,
doctorate, right?
yeah.
In something
hmm
cool.
Yes. So the field is called performance studies. It's a hybrid
Interesting.
discipline. Um, what what I did was sort of embed myself in gaming communities, spend a lot of time in person, online, deep
Any
interviews.
particular games give
Yeah.
us a
Well,
sense
so
for like,
I
I'm not a
was
gamer. So what were the games that.
so I was particularly studying games that intentionally blurred the boundaries between virtual worlds and the real world. So games that would send you GPS coordinates and ask you to go out to real world locations. I mean,
Oh,
this was
interesting.
like 15 years before Pokemon Go.
Hmm.
That was actually the kind of game that I was developing. So as a grad student, I was making games and also studying the communities of players to see, you know, if you go back to a real world location where you played a game, does it change your emotions in that space? Does it change your behavior in that space? And what I was finding is that people were more likely to talk to strangers if they had played a game in a space. They were more likely to try new things. They had a little more courage, a little more curiosity,
Hmm.
and they had a sense of belonging, which I thought was really interesting. Even if the game was done, they're not actively playing the game. There was something about having that positive, collaborative, social,
So
challenging
it
experience.
carries over out into their real life.
It carried over. And then at the
Interesting.
same time, I was studying purely online games like World of Warcraft. And I was seeing a lot of conversation around, I guess, a sense of this gap between how successful they felt in the game worlds. They were leaders, they were communicators, they had this real sense of mastery and excellence, and yet were maybe sometimes struggling to feel validated for those same skills and strengths in other areas of their lives, or they weren't
Hmm.
connected to opportunities where they could use those skills and strengths
Hmm.
for some positive impact in society. And so that gap got very interesting to me, and I wanted to
Yeah.
sort of
That's
try to fill that gap.
right. God, there's so many ways we could take this, but that gap has led to a lot of mental health issues, right? Because you get
Yeah.
immersed in something, this one thing, and then all of a sudden, reality is a different story, and so
hmm
you have a lot of kids kind of don't really know how to bridge that and how to solve that, and I don't think parents do either.
I can
So,
give you a practical tip for
yeah, let's
how
please
to
do
build that
because
bridge.
this is a big issue with teens these
Yes.
days, I think.
Yes. So anybody can do this. If somebody's listening and they're playing a lot of games, but they feel that gap, you can do this on your own. But it's particularly powerful if you have a young person or a child in your life. And I do this with my own kids. I have 7-year-old
Mhm.
twin daughters who are already
Oh,
playing games. I
congratulations.
have the same conversation with them. So the critical questions to ask someone in your life or yourself who is a gamer are questions about the real skills and strengths that are getting developed in the games and virtual worlds.
Mhm.
Because I did a meta analysis of more than 500 scientific papers on the psychology of gaming, addiction, how it affects real life happiness and health, and the number one predictor of positive impact, and it's defensive against pathological gaming or addiction, prevents it, is if somebody can answer this question: what have you gotten better at since you started playing this game?
Mhm.
Or what does it take to be good at this game? And
Mhm.
also, what's the most challenging thing that you've had to do in this game? How did you do it? So when players can tell stories about the skills they've developed, and it could be, I keep my calm under pressure, or I'm a really like flexible, agile thinker. I can come up with 20 different strategies. I don't give up when things are hard. All of these different things that are generalizable to real life. When young people start to talk about these, they become essentially fused into their identity. And so
Mhm.
they become somebody, not just in the game, but somebody in their whole lives who is calm under pressure, who doesn't give up when things are hard, who has really flat, flexible,
Mhm.
agile thinking. But the bridge happens through that conversation. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
always asking my kids, they start playing a new game on their tablet. I'm like, like, what's the challenge? Okay, what are you trying to learn how to do? And then, a few days later, okay, what are you getting better at? That conversation is the predictor of who benefits from games and
Mm-hmm.
brings those strengths to real life, versus people who think there's something about the game. Well, it's the game that makes me feel good. It's the fact that it's not real that makes it feel safe. That's a dangerous way of thinking, because then
Right.
they turn to the game for escape instead of seeing the game as a springboard for positive emotions and social strengths and skills that they can just bounce right back into their whole lives with those same strengths.
That's fascinating. So really, mental management is the important skill, and that's been true forever, right? It's like
Mm,
if you're not training your mind, then culture is training it for you. You go into a gaming environment, and suddenly, you're experiencing these things, but you're not trained how to translate that into real world. And so,
mm,
I think the work that you're doing is extraordinarily valuable because we're heading into the metaverse, and we
mm-hmm.
need to basically live both. We have to straddle the
Yeah.
fence.
Mm,
When I grew up in upstate New York, it was like, I can look at it and liken it to being in a video game, because we literally went out into this incredible world we call nature, and we had to solve problems. We got ourselves into all sorts of trouble, right? And we had to solve problems, and yet it was a very expensive and painful kind of process. Whereas you get to do that now in a virtual world, almost free, and
mm-hmm.
you can hit replay,
Mm-hmm.
and the consequences aren't nearly what they are in the real world, right? And so you
Yeah.
can you can literally, as a kid, not only learn anything, but you can practice being a good human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
if we could, so I'm curious, what's the state of, developing games that teach kids not just how to have fun and solve problems in this weird, strange, like World of Warcraft or Fortnite environment, but also teach life skills deliberatively that translate
Mm.
into being a good person
Mm.
in the real
Mm.
world.
Mm. I mean, there is an amazing organization called Games for Change. It's a nonprofit based in New York City that folks are interested in kind of seeing the state of the field. So these are game developers who have really made it a priority to try to make games that have positive impacts on players and also on society. So that
Nice.
would be that would
Are
be
there any
a
particular games that have like risen to the surface that they've been behind or supported?
yeah. I mean, one of the most compelling games that they've helped bring attention to is a game called Papers, Please, that helps you get more empathy for people who may be displaced and have to migrate. People become refugees, and the sort
Oh,
of
interesting.
difficulty of having to find your way without documentation or without legal access to things that you need. I would say that that game it's been very popular, with millions of players, and it's really helped, I think, a younger generation, I guess, feel like they have almost a firsthand experience of the types of social challenges that so many people are experiencing. I mean, now with the war, we're also
Hmm.
seeing climate migrants. And so I
Hmm.
do think it is exciting to think that young people could, play a game for an hour online, but have this experience that feels almost as if you've lived it yourself, because that is something that's interesting about games. Our minds process a lot of what we experience in games as if they are real
That's right.
experiences. It's not that we get confused, we still know the difference between real life and a
Virtual and real.
game,
Yeah.
but the feelings are very powerful, and they do tend to create the kind of memory that stays with us and makes the issues we encounter in games feel relevant. So,
Yeah.
that's a it's a good place to go to the Games for Change website and the whole gallery of games like that people can
That's
learn
neat.
to
Well,
play. Yeah.
to that point, right? I have, my philosophy is essentially that the mind is, mind creates everything. The mind is even creating this body and this experience. So if you put your mind in virtual environments, it's every bit as real as if your mind
Yes.
is simply being drug along by this body in the physical world.
It's
And it's
especially
going
true with immersive virtual reality
Super
technologies.
immersive, right?
Yes.
Because you can't,
Yes.
at a psychosomatic level, you can't really. It's not going to be able to distinguish, And
Mm-hmm.
also, I think there's probably something because the feedback is so immediate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as slow as it is in the physical world, or it's also not as stunted because in the physical world, we've been, the culture has trained people to act a certain way, and those
Mm.
rules don't apply in the virtual world.
It's interesting that you
You know,
describe the real world feedback as almost feeling stunted by comparison to immersive
right?
worlds. There's actually some new research trying to understand this phenomenon. I don't think we understand it perfectly yet, but there's an experience that many people who are spending more time in virtual reality worlds report that when they go back to real life, there's a feeling of dissociation
Yeah,
that
I believe it.
the real world no longer feels real. It doesn't have that intensity
Right.
of color, emotion, and sound that these designed virtual worlds do. And that's tricky because, we were talking about mental health impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists are trying to figure out, is this going to be a problem? We don't want people walking around the real world feeling
Right.
dissociated from it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something about the technology that can be changed, or is it simply duration? People who spend more than an hour at a time have this side effect, but
Mm-hmm.
less than an hour, your brain doesn't get so overwhelmed that it can toggle back and forth. I think we do need to kind of pay attention to that. I for one,
Agree.
am not going to be spending hours and hours in virtual environments myself until
Mm-hmm.
that's better understood.
100%, and this is a fascinating area. I mean, essentially, it's training the mind at a very fast frequency
Yes.
and a very intense frequency that isn't syncing up with the way
Mm-hmm.
the vibrational quality of the whatever we call the real world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there, I
Exactly.
could see how that disconnect could be jarring and could lead to some challenges, or lead to kids wanting to spend more and more time because they're uncomfortable.
Right.
Like this is
Yeah.
my grandson is this. He just wants to spend all this time. It's a real challenge for his parents because he wants to
Mm-hmm.
be online because that's where he's happy and that's where his friends are and that's where he
Mm-hmm.
feels comfortable.
Mm. It's
And
it's
it
it
has to
is
do with this.
tricky. I mean, some research that's come out recently, looking over the first year of the pandemic, during when lockdowns were more common and there was more social isolation, found that young people, and especially boys who had an online gaming habit before the pandemic, seemed to weather it with better mental health because they already
Interesting.
had these habits of connecting online and they already had
Hmm.
these communities,
Hmm.
and so they didn't feel as much disruption because it was more of a continuation of how they
Hmm.
related to others. So, in some ways, you can look at it as a more resilient kind of
Hmm.
social
Right.
relationship. But as you said, there's a lot of nuance, and so certainly trying to be flexible around gaming habits and patterns is something I recommend. Like, don't spend all your time playing the same game. Don't, like, mix it up. Go, seasons of your life. Play a little more.
Hmm.
Play a little less.
Love that.
I think that
Be
is a
balanced.
helpful way to find balance and make sure that you're always growing. I mean, the best way to make sure that you're growing is just always expose yourself to new games. In fact, in aging seniors, there's less risk of cognitive decline, fewer symptoms of dementia for people who expose themselves to games that they've never played before. So I think
Hmm.
that's like really important. If you're feeling kind of stuck, you're like, oh, I need to like fire up
Hmm.
my brain. It's almost like learning a new language,
Right.
maybe like learning a new recipe. You can kind of unstick your brain, force a little neuroplasticity
Hmm.
by playing something that is beyond your comfort zone of genres. So
Yeah.
that's
So you're saying
another.
I should move beyond solitaire?
Well, that is literally what I tell people. If you are still playing solitaire on your
Ruh-roh.
computer, it is time for some Fortnite. That is for sure.
This is a great place to kind of segue into like futuristic and
Hmm.
imagineering, imaginable type stuff, which is the title of your book. I kind of had a sense that gaming is, as a technology, is really kind of preparing youth to deal with a future that's coming fast at them, right? So,
Mhm.
and my proof of that is, for me, like I haven't watched TV in 20 years. I'm not a, I use technology for work and for research, and obviously a little bit of gaming and with my solitaire on my phone, but I've got to now move beyond that, of course. Sounds like. Um, and so when I like plug into network TV or plug into a video game, even watching my grandson play it, like my brain
Yeah.
doesn't like it. It doesn't vibrate at that level or whatever. You know what I mean? I can't
Mm.
think that fast.
Mhm.
So I'd probably be a disaster as a fighter pilot in space. You know what I mean? But these kids, I'm
Yeah.
speaking as a warrior, of course. Not everyone wants to approach it that way. Like the video games, the simulations are great for training the mind to operate in a VUCA environment. Volatile,
Yes.
complex, uncertain, ambiguous, right?
Yes,
And
it's
that's the
one of our
future, which
favorite
is here,
terms. Yes, at
right?
the Institute for the Future, we're always talking about the VUCA world. It is true. If you look at the most replicated kind of study in the field of game research, fMRI studies show that gamers process real-time information differently, and they are able to process and make sense of and respond effectively to multiple streams of information much faster. And their brains are already coming up with new strategies before they have conscious recognition that
Amazing,
something
right?
has changed. And that is a skill for the VUCA world.
Hmm.
When we're just even going about our ordinary lives, I think the biggest cause of, I guess, feeling blindsided by reality is that we're not noticing change quickly enough. Like we wake
Right.
up one day and we're like, oh my God, why is everything shut down?
Hmm.
Well, we weren't paying attention to the clues. We weren't noticing the signals of change. And
Hmm.
for sure, at a neurological level, games do train our brains to notice change faster and to start developing strategies even before we have conscious awareness of the change. And that is something that I think, the whiplash of extreme weather and extreme
Hmm.
political events
Hmm.
and the pandemic and whatever else we might face, it will be an important gift and a kind of mental strength to have a
Yeah.
brain that can notice what's happening
And
just
I
a little
think
bit faster.
what I think is fascinating, because I can see that like very clearly, that at least having gaming in your life, whether an adult or a kid, will provide some resiliency to be able to harmonize with technology and also understand kind of the VUCA environment we're in. And I've been teaching that from the Navy SEAL perspective, which is like
Mhm.
being in a massive video game, but it costs millions of dollars for us to train that way, or billions
Mm.
of dollars actually. So it's not for everybody, obviously. But how does your assertion that gaming helps you kind of like live into the future, be more
Mhm.
predictive or more
Mhm.
um,
I
able
mean,
to
mm,
imagine the
mhm,
unimaginable? And is it just because you're in these virtual environments that have like I've really gotten into? Let me just finish this thought, because I'm
mm.
like going down this rabbit hole. I've really gotten into sci-fi audiobooks. For
Mm.
some reason, like I'm just captured by them, and I never really would read a sci-fi book, but when I
Oh.
put one in audio format, my life comes alive internally. And so now all of a sudden, so over the past 5 years, I've been able to imagine in all these futures. And then, of course, some of the amazing TV shows, like Star Trek Discovery, or,
Mm.
some of these, Expanse, that show you a future of possibilities. That
Mm.
helps you be prepared for those possibilities that come in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years with artificial intelligence and robotics and everything. Do you think that same thing is playing out with gamers, that because they're living in a lot of times futuristic realities, then they're
Mm.
more capable of predicting the future that's coming?
Well, I mean, my job is to create games that kind of pair those sci-fi scenarios with gamers who might benefit from pre-imagining or pre-feeling those scenarios. And sometimes
I
they're not
see.
gamers, right? Sometimes they're
Like
government officials,
like simulations or just
yeah, and
yeah.
but I specialize in something that I call a social simulation, which is different from a computer simulation where you just put in a bunch of algorithms, you drop in some data, you press a button, and it spits out,
Right.
if this were a pandemic, X many people would get sick, this many people would die, the
Right.
economy would it be. That's algorithmic simulation. What I create are scenarios that I invite people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people to come together online and imagine for 48 hours, for 10 days, oftentimes for as long as 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Keep imagining that you are trying to adapt to this scenario. How would you feel? What problems would you have? How would you help others? And most famously, back in 2010, I was creating a future game for the World Bank. We had
Mhm.
20,000 people spend 10 weeks imagining a world set 10 years in the future. So the game was set in the year 2020. And we asked them how they would adapt and try to help others during a series of cascading global crises that started with a respiratory pandemic coming out of China that was complicated by supply chain
Go
disruptions,
figure. Right.
extreme heat and wildfires, social media driven conspiracy theories and misinformation about the pandemic. What do you do? How do you help others? How are you changing things in your community and in your own life? And we had people spend
Mhm.
10 weeks imagining this in 2010. And yes, I went back during, in the real 2020. Of course, I had to go find these people and find out,
Right.
did you have a different experience of the real year 2020 because you had spent
Had this
time
experience.
really imagining this?
Is there
and
any way
and
to collect kind of the collective wisdom of the group or
mm,
the group
hmm
that's doing these games?
yeah, I mean,
Because
well, we will
that would be
often
kind of valuable,
publish.
right?
Yeah,
Oh,
we often publish reports for another well-known simulation that I ran for the Institute for the Future. It was called Superstruct. We published a series of reports back in 2009. And again, we were looking ahead to 2019 because futurists love to look 10 years in the future, so that we're looking at problems that we have enough time to solve. Like simulating tomorrow or next year, it's not that helpful because
mhm.
you basically already run out of time if something happens tomorrow that you need to get ready for. We want to have a long runway so we can really make a change or really prepare. And so, yeah, sometimes we do publish these reports online. And for Superstruct, we publish all these strategies for being more resilient. If
Mhm.
there's a pandemic, if there's a supply chain disruption, if there's a refugee crisis, we were imagining all of this happening at the same time
Mhm.
in the year 2019. And what was interesting to me, following up with participants, was that they did report feeling less anxiety, feeling less shocked, actually noticing the chain of events faster, getting the supplies they needed for their family faster, making changes to their habits faster, and also being able to just like jump in and feel like they had already thought through how they would use their own skills and abilities to help others
Mhm.
during a respiratory pandemic, and we're able to act faster. And so for me, this was like a very strange validation that I started researching, 20 years ago. Could playing games where we try to imagine the future, could it produce actionable insights? Could it help people prepare? The other thing that was weird about these games, Superstruct and Evoke, is that we were just asking people to look around their lives and tell stories about what they would do. So we might say, you've been advised to isolate for 2 weeks. You've been exposed. Under what circumstances do you not follow this order? Where are you going? If you're going to
Mhm.
break quarantine, you're going to break isolation. And the number one thing that players said was for church or for religious worship, which was kind of surprising. I mean, I don't know that I would have predicted that. But
Mhm.
during the real pandemic, that did in fact turn out to be the number one super spreading event or phenomenon. It was the number one thing that people went to, even if they had tested positive for COVID, even if they were told to isolate. If you look at all of the seating events around the planet, a majority of them are linked to religious worship or gatherings, which is just to say that players, ordinary people, can accurately predict what other ordinary people will do using their own knowledge of their own needs, their own values, their own hopes and behaviors. And asking more people to participate in these kinds of imagination experiments now, we might get a lot of useful information, a lot of collective wisdom, so that if we wake up in one of these worlds, we can better predict what might happen, and maybe, I don't know, just not be so shocked. What, people are fighting about masks? We had people practice wearing masks, and we knew this was going to be an issue based on how people responded back in 2010 and everything they reported. So
help me understand how these these future thinking games. Is there an immersive environment like you'd find in Fortnite, or is it really more of a linear thought? Go reflect upon this in your life and report back kind of thing.
It's socially immersive. We do not use virtual environments like you would find in Minecraft or Fortnite. It's not a visual 3D environment. Instead, we create essentially alternate reality social networks. So you would be invited to come to a social network that we create specifically for the game. And it looks like Twitter, it looks like Discord, whatever, Facebook, whatever is the...
And so you seed it with news and things that are...
Exactly. We seed it with the scenario. Okay. Every day you come back, there's more news from the scenario, but you're helping tell this story. So we would have, on any given day, you would have hundreds or thousands of people sharing their photos, their videos, their, advice, all based on imagining, oh my God, I'm living through, let's say we're imagining it's the year 2030 and the internet has been shut off by the government for cybersecurity reasons. And we are now being asked to live for 30 days without internet.
Ironically posting your thoughts on the internet.
Yeah, we would have a backstory for that. They would all be on the Mesh network in that case. Everybody would have had downloaded a Mesh app to their phones already. So we have like the secret underground internet, which is of course what people are doing right now for government mandated internet shutdowns. But so what's so amazing about this is, everybody gets to share the future together. And I like this better than just writing a program and pressing a button and seeing what it spits out. Because if we try to simulate the future by just running these programs, it's all predicated on, did the person writing the program have the best theory or model? If you have thousands of people playing at the same time, there's going to be weird stuff. There's going to be surprising trends and phenomenon, and you're going to surface things that...
It's crowdsourcing the future. I love that.
It's crowdsourcing the future. And it's really, there, there's two reasons to do this, right? You can get actionable insight, you can get this wisdom. But for me, I have to admit, the thing that makes me most excited about the work that I do is people just say they feel better. And it is so weird. Like we have them play through really scary scenarios, things that would be challenging and disruptive. And they come out on the other side of it fired up, confident, clarity. And there's just like a psychological benefit to being willing to really seriously imagine what you would do in a difficult situation. I'm sure that makes sense to someone like you, who probably has had to do a lot of mental preparation and visualizing what you would do.
You just described, every SEAL mission is you've got to go in and collectively imagine failure 100 different ways to Sunday. And how you'd respond. And then when it happens, you're like, hey, I've been here before, and this is how we're going to respond. And if that doesn't work, we'll try plan B and then C. And
exactly. So how do we give ordinary people access to this kind of mental training and this kind of mental preparation? These future scenarios, the games that are in the book Imaginable, you learn these habits. You play through these games with your family, with your coworkers. You can get access to that same kind of mental training.
I imagine all these games are not like log in and do this online, but like things you can do together with your family. You're just like,
the ones in the
here's
book,
the game. Let's go. Let's play this. It's an imagination game.
Yeah, the ones in the book you could definitely do offline if you prefer. In fact, a lot of people like to do it as a journaling practice. So you
Yeah,
get a
you bet.
notebook and you essentially journal for 10 days from each future scenario. And I think it's about 15 future scenarios in the book. I
Hmm.
encourage you to spend 10 days with each scenario and to try to find at least one other person to
Hmm.
trade your notes or journal entries, or to,
Hmm.
get on the phone and be like, okay, what did you imagine today?
Hmm.
Because there is a benefit to doing this with somebody else. So you
Agree.
get
Yep.
surprised by what
Right.
they say or how they would react, kind
Hmm.
of
And
broadens
that
your
informs
perspective.
your thinking, and then you're informed there,
Right.
and then so collectively, and the more
Yeah.
people, the more surprising things that
Yeah.
come up. So,
But
do
we
each of
do.
these 15
Oh, mhm,
scenarios you have online
mhm.
as well?
Yeah. So you can also come online and play with. We have a community of 1,000 people now who are playing along with the book.
Nice.
In a community called Urgent Optimists, because
Hmm.
that's what we're trying to create urgent optimism for the future,
Hmm.
not blind hope, but feeling fired up to be ready and make positive change. And so you can come online and play with people from around the world, which is really nice, because I have to say that even as the designer of these scenarios, when I get at least a few hundred people playing with them, I am always shocked. Like, I'm there. There are always people saying and doing things that I just could not have imagined. I don't have the experience or the perspective. So it is. I think it is extra good to try to do it. With people from different countries, from different
A
industries, different
great way to
communities. Yeah.
to be collaborative, and also to practice your global mindset, right? To get out of our
Yes.
little, echo chambers, and to recognize that there are some brilliant people all over the globe.
Mm.
I spoke at a Tony Robbins event on Sunday. It was called Wealth Mastery, and 5,000 people from 99 countries,
Mm. Mm.
99 countries, all working on improving themselves, all, dealing with their own version of human fears and,
Mm.
challenges, and all of them worried about the future, just like we're
Yes.
talking about. So that idea of being able to connect globally and create a global team or a global
Mm-hmm.
community
Mm-hmm.
is super powerful, because I think ultimately, I love this idea of urgent optimism, because it's sort of similar to my, when I teach, it's like if you can see a positive future, then of course, you know, first you have to embrace it and embody that and get out of fear, right? You got to feed that
Mm-hmm.
courage wolf. But then you bring other people into that future. So you've got to imagine it first.
Yes.
And if you can't look forward and imagine a positive future with technology the way it's going, then you're going to believe all the dystopian crap. And
Yes.
that's going to bring more negativity, more fear, and it's going to make it more likely to come true, in my view.
I think so. And I was really taken aback. There was a survey. It was the largest survey ever conducted on the topic of how we feel about the future. And it was published just a few months ago in the Lancet Planetary
Mhm.
Health Journal.
Mm.
So very rigorous research. They talked to over 10,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 25. And they found that a majority of young people from all over the world um, agreed with the statement that humanity is doomed and that they personally have no future. And they're really talking about climate change in
Right.
that case. And it was really important for me when I was writing Imaginable to try to fill the book, especially the end of the book. We have these three sort of mega scenarios at the end of the book that I want people to spend at least 10 days imagining. And they're all an effort to plant in people's mind a realistic scenario that actually solves our problems,
Mhm.
that allows us to feel like we can really believe in a positive future, that it's not just by like putting our heads in the sand and hoping, but by
Mhm.
saying, there are ways to tackle climate change. There are technologies, there are scientific breakthroughs. It's not all up to you and, how much, your individual carbon impact there is. We can imagine large scale systemic
Mhm.
societal change that will actually allow us to wake up in a world that we're happy to be in. We don't have to be so scared and worried about
Right.
humanity's future. And I think we've had too many dystopian
Agree.
future narratives. We need some happy stories about what it
Right.
looks like if we succeed.
I agree. And I think what your work is powerful, because Everybody has a voice in that.
Mm.
And so the disempowering view has been, it's up to government to solve it, or, international institutions. And obviously that's not true because they've failed.
Mm.
It's actually up to every human being to do this at scale, which now the
Yes.
internet allows us to do, and immersive environments allow us to do. So if you have billions of people, or let's just say on a planet that has 10 billion people in 10 years, or whatever that number might be, what if 10% of us or 20% of us really truly were living, believing, seeing, communicating, and mentally projecting that positive future?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you buy into the idea that everything that's outside of us is a reflection or a projection of what's inside of us, then guess what? Things have changed really quickly. And then
Mm.
you add to that all the multiplicative effects of these social entrepreneurs and the positive technological innovations that'll come out to solve global warming and to, you
Yes.
know what I mean, all these things. And wow, you can start to see how things could change positively really quickly.
Yes.
Right?
And it's important that we have a future we can believe in, because, you know, if we feel alienated, if we feel hopeless, that's where you
Right.
get new terrorist movements. That's where you
That's right.
get,
Well, you feed into the negativity and the cycle of violence.
yes, yes. So it's not just about solving the actual problems we have to solve, but it's also
Yeah,
about preventing
it's
global
preventing.
alienation that is
That's
going
right.
to create new streams of, just we don't want to live in that world. I don't want to live in that world.
I don't want to live in that world. And the world's coming fast. I mean, the future's
Mhm.
coming fast. The future's here. I was at an event with Peter Diamandis where he was
Oh.
interviewing um, the Google CEO or former chairman, Eric Schmidt, right? Is that his
Mm-hmm.
name?
Mm-hmm.
And the topic veered into AGI, right? Um, or was it artificial general intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, AI is specific
Yeah.
intelligence, right? So solve Go, and they can a computer can beat the best Go player or chess or whatever. But AGI is when a computer becomes self-learning in a general sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric was very clear that this isn't a matter of if it's going to happen, but when. Not everyone would agree with that, but he was. And when that happens, and you have a computer, they call that the breakout moment. I'm sure you're
Mm-hmm.
familiar with that. And so in that breakout moment, he thinks is going to happen the next 10 years. And then, United States is working on, Europe's working on theirs, China's working on theirs. And so you're going to have, it's like this race, because
Yeah.
the first AGI to reach breakout wins, is this
Mm-hmm.
view.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, from there, you have all future possibilities suddenly get magnified by,
Mm.
trillions
Mm.
of times, because of the power of this thing to be able to solve problems, to know things that human beings can't know or don't think they can know.
And the real question that is not answered yet is, will this technological resource be like the internet, that is accessible to
Accessible,
all,
or will it be
and you can build whatever you want on it,
right? Mm-hmm.
and we have
Or
so
will it
many.
be
Yeah.
stovepiped and held by government for
Right.
oppressive
And
purposes, or
yes,
violence?
I mean, in some ways, intelligence, I mean, it could be weaponized in the sense that if you have access to, um, to
Yeah,
to
my
such significantly more
it's fun to talk about this
impactful.
for a moment. I know that you are, as a future thinker, I'm sure have thought a lot about this, but my sense is that any AGI, um, that has access to all that, to the combined intelligence of the human race and beyond, will also have access to, the endless possibilities that exist with the positive, variations of the future or future decision making, as well as the negative, and will want to, or will be compelled to, move toward the positive, both for its own survival, unless it's coded in there specifically to veer
Mm.
toward the negative.
Well, I think it may have to be coded in specifically to veer
to veer to the
towards
positive.
certain positive values. I mean, what we're seeing in self-learning systems is that if they are trained on large scale human created data sets, they tend to veer towards the negative in that the
Is that
patterns
right?
they pick
Right.
up,
Because they're
you know,
picking up human patterns, right?
yes. And well, and they're picking it up from this decade. So a lot of data sets are social media data sets, they're
Right.
online data sets,
Because we
they're
didn't have those data sets before this,
right.
before the internet.
And maybe that's not the best place to be getting, information
Right?
because
Right?
we behave, be interesting if more of it were coming from video games than from Reddit. That might be an interesting experiment to see if there is um, a push. I mean, AI that is trained, for example, on Dota, has developed new kind of hybrid competitive collaboration models of behaving that we don't see a lot in human society. The
What's
researchers
Dota,
are
by the way?
very interested. It's like a game like League of Legends. It's
I
just a
got it.
popular
Okay. Right.
strategy game, and it's Elon Musk has invested a lot of money in training AI on Dota. So it's
Mhm.
a kind of interesting space.
Mhm.
But one of the things that coming out of it is these new forms where the AI sometimes compete and sometimes collaborate, and they don't adopt purely competitive strategy or purely cooperative, competitive, collaborative strategies. And so scientists are like, we can't really find examples of that behavior in human culture, but maybe we could learn from it and adopt it. But so we're seeing better behavior in AI, or maybe higher values in AI, come out of machines that are being trained on video games
Yeah,
than on social media.
the scientists need to know where to point the nose of
Hmm.
the AI, right?
Yes,
If they were to
yes.
go and be able to study the collaborative um, problem solving of a Navy SEAL team, right? They would have some extraordinary results.
That's
That
an
does
idea.
exist in human behavior, but just not at the mass cultural media level,
Mm.
because that just
Mm-hmm.
amplifies the worst.
Mm.
But it's out there.
Mm.
And there's got to be a way for reachers to access. And I think you've stumbled upon one of them, which is to go into these positive gaming communities and use
Or
those as a
just
way to
think,
train.
China's training their AI on their social media, which is much more tightly regulated and
Right.
censored, and it will be fascinating to
The
see.
point is, it's coming fast, right? Like
Yeah.
I think
Hmm.
for all listeners to understand and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because when I listen to Schmidt and Peter Diamandis, in fact, Peter's got a new book called "The Future's Faster Than You
Hmm.
Think" or something
Faster
like
than you
that,
think. Yep. Hmm.
and it's like here, it's all this technology which is now in laboratories and in medical institutions and whatnot is literally on the cusp of being commercialized. And
Hmm.
then the
Hmm.
AI is getting smarter and smarter, and the iterations is getting really quickly happening quicker and quicker. So it's not like 40 years from now or 50 years in some distant future that we're going to see some of the things that we see in Star Trek. It's literally in the next 10 to 20 years, and it's
Yeah. I mean, I think
accelerating.
most people who are alive will live through that. Who are alive today will live through that transformation.
Exactly.
We know most people who are alive today will be alive in 2050, and that's sort of the time horizon that
Right.
people expect to see really radical at scale impacts of
Right.
artificial intelligence.
Things
Yeah.
that even today might take 20 years to develop will be developed in months and then days
And
with
it's,
AI.
we can't predict exactly what that will be like, but it's a good reason to get some extra practice now
Right.
playing with different futures so that we can
Right.
just build that comfort with discomfort. I always
That's
say,
right.
like, even if the future
That's one of my
scenarios you're
favorite sayings, by the
imagining,
way.
yeah.
Coming from- Love
You
it.
might imagine a scenario that you never have to live through, but if you were able to adapt your mind to a strange new world and really
Hmm.
feel that weirdness and get used to coping with uncertainties, um, that's good practice for whatever weird stuff we're going to
Right.
live through. We develop it's a kind of mental emotional resilience that you really can only get by exposing yourself to things that make you uncomfortable are hard to imagine when you can teach the brain to imagine the kinds of things other people describe as unimaginable, then you've got a mental asset for weird AI singularity type events.
That's right.
And whatever
But and
else might
also,
happen.
like in the gaming environment, you recognize that you are a co-creator of this reality, and so
Oh, yes.
to start taking responsibility for that.
I like that. Yes.
That's
Yes.
awesome. So the book, Imaginable, fantastic title. I love that. Available anywhere. But what where would people go to like participate in these games and to learn more about your work?
So there's an app. You can search in the App Store for Urgent Optimists,
Urgent
or
Optimist.
you can go to urgentoptimist.org.
Okay. Urgentoptimist.org. And do you personally have any social media that or anything like that, or do you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter.
Awesome.
For now. There's
Right.
a lot of change coming. But yeah, you can find me. I'm at Avant Game. So like the avant-garde, but
Avant Games. I love it.
Yeah.
Jane, it's been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate the work you're doing. You really opened my eyes a bit. I'm going to move beyond solitude or solitaire. No, I'm not in solitude.
That was a good slip of the tongue, right? You're gonna play a social game. That's I like that.
I'm gonna play a social game. Awesome. All right, check it out.
Thank you, Mark.
Avantgame.com, right? Is that what you said?
That's on Twitter. And then
that's your Twitter,
urgentoptimist.org.
Urgentoptimist.org. Awesome. Thank you, Jane. We'll talk to you soon, I hope.
I hope so.